Single rancher found two Apache sisters freezing in the snow. Now they both want to be his wives. John Carter had lived alone for many years on his ranch in the high, rugged mountains of Arizona. The land was beautiful, but harsh. Winter there was unforgiving, and the snow could cover the hills and valleys in a thick, white blanket within hours. John was used to the cold, used to the isolation, and used to the silence of the snow-covered plains. He had learned how to care for his cattle in freezing weather, how to ride through blizzards without fear, and how to keep his small cabin warm during nights when the wind howled like a pack of wolves. Yet that winter morning was different. It was the coldest he had ever felt, even with layers of wool clothing, boots, and gloves. The sky was heavy with gray clouds, and the wind cut through every layer like a knife. John had woken early to check on his cattle. He drove his small sleigh along the frozen paths he had traveled hundreds of times before. The animals needed feeding, and some had strayed close to the tree line where the snow was deeper. As he moved through the snow, he could barely see more than a few feet in front of him. Every step he took crunched loudly in the silence, but sometimes the wind carried strange, faint sounds that made him pause. At first he thought it was the trees creaking, but then he heard it again, a soft, almost human noise. John stopped and listened carefully. It was a faint cry, weak and trembling, carried by the cold wind. He squinted through the white haze and scanned the landscape. His heart began to race. The mountains were dangerous in this weather. Travelers could easily get lost, and even seasoned ranchers could find themselves trapped in snowdrifts. Without a second thought, he guided his sleigh toward the sound, pushing his horse to move faster through the icy terrain. As he approached the edge of a frozen creek, he finally saw them. Two figures, small and shivering, huddled together in the snow. Their clothes were thin, not enough to protect them from the bitter cold. Snow clung to their hair and eyelashes. One was slightly taller than the other, and they held each other tightly, trying to share whatever warmth they could. The sight made John's heart ache. These were children, or maybe young women. He could not tell from this distance, but they were clearly struggling to survive. He called out gently, his voice carrying over the wind. "Hey, are you all right?" The figures stirred, but did not move at first. Then, slowly, one of them raised a hand, shielding her face from the wind. Their eyes were wide, full of fear, and fixed on him. It was clear they were frightened, but also that they had no strength left to run. John urged his horse closer, speaking softly.
"It's okay. You're safe now."
"I'm taking you somewhere warm." Reaching the creek, John climbed off the sleigh and knelt in the snow. "Can you stand?" he asked, his eyes scanning their faces. One of the girls nodded weakly, while the other shivered violently. Without waiting, John gently lifted them, one by one, feeling the smallness and fragility of their bodies. He wrapped them in thick blankets he always carried for emergencies, holding them close to his chest to share his own body heat. Back in the sleigh, the two sisters. He realized they were sisters when he saw the way they clung to each other, huddled together, their teeth chattering. The taller one, who introduced herself quietly as Anna, whispered broken words that John could barely understand. The other, Lila, was silent, but squeezed Anna's hand tightly, her eyes never leaving John. The trust in them was fragile, but it was there. They were tired, frozen, and frightened, yet they allowed him to carry them to safety. The ride back to the cabin was slow and careful. Snowdrifts blocked parts of the trail, and the wind seemed determined to push them back. John talked to them in soft, calming tones, telling them about the cabin, the fire waiting for them, and a warm meal. He could feel their small hands trembling against the blankets. Despite the cold biting at his face and the harsh wind, he focused only on keeping them safe. Finally, they reached the cabin. John opened the door, and the warmth of the wood stove greeted them, filling the small space with heat and light. He gently helped them inside, laying them near the fire and covering them with extra blankets. The sisters sat huddled together, still shivering but starting to relax a little as the warmth seeped into their frozen bodies. John prepared a simple meal of stew, careful to make it not too hot, and coaxed them to eat. Anna and Lila took small bites, still cautious, still wary of this stranger who had suddenly become their protector. John spoke gently. telling them he would not harm them, that they could rest here as long as they needed, and that he would make sure they were safe. Over time, as the stew warmed their bodies, their faces relaxed, and small smiles appeared. As the afternoon passed, John learned more about them. Anna was the elder sister, bold and protective, always looking out for Lila. Lila was quiet, shy, and observant, often letting Anna speak for both of them. They had been traveling with relatives to another settlement when the blizzard struck unexpectedly. They had been separated from their group, lost in the mountains, and afraid they would not survive the cold. John listened, nodding, letting them speak in broken sentences. He admired their courage. Few people could survive a night alone in such harsh conditions, yet these sisters had made it this far. Now, in the safety of the cabin, he could see the relief in their eyes. For the first time in many hours, they laughed softly at small jokes he made, the sound warm and musical against the crackling fire. By evening, the sisters were beginning to regain some warmth, though exhaustion still clung to them. John had built a small bed near the fire for them, making sure they were covered in blankets. He fetched water and more food, insisting they eat even if their appetites were small. He realized that survival was only the first step. They needed comfort, safety, and trust to begin healing from the ordeal. That night, John sat by the fire, watching them sleep. He felt a strange sense of responsibility and connection. These girls, whom he had never met before that morning, had now become part of his life. The snowstorm outside raged on, but inside the cabin there was warmth, light, and hope. John knew that the coming days would bring challenges. Communication, care, and understanding would all be needed. But for now, he was content to see them safe, their small hands clasped together as they rested. It was a quiet, powerful moment. A man alone in the mountains and two young sisters who had almost succumbed to the winter were now together, alive, and beginning to trust one another. John understood that their lives had changed forever, and so had his. The winter that had seemed so merciless had brought them together in a way that was unexpected, and perhaps, in some strange way, fated. By the time John finally went to bed, he could hear the sisters' quiet breathing from the other room. The snowstorm had not ended, but inside a bond was forming, a bond built on survival, kindness, and the fragile beginnings of trust. For John, the ranch no longer felt quite so lonely. And for Anna and Lila, the terrifying wilderness had led them to a safe place, and to a man whose courage and compassion might just be the key to their future. The next morning, sunlight struggled to pierce through the heavy gray clouds, casting a pale light over John's cabin. The wind still howled outside, rattling the wooden shutters, but inside, warmth and quiet filled the small space. John woke before dawn, as he always did, and quietly moved around the cabin to prepare breakfast. He knew the sisters had been through a terrifying night and would need food and care to regain their strength. Anna stirred first, blinking against the soft morning light. She looked around the cabin, the blanket still wrapped around her shoulders, and slowly sat up. Lila, smaller and shyer, stayed under her blanket, peeking out only when Anna encouraged her. John smiled gently as he entered the room with a tray of porridge and warm water. "Good morning," he said softly. "Eat slowly. You need energy for today." The sisters hesitated at first, unused to being served or cared for in such a gentle way. Anna, always the brave one, reached for the bowl and took small, careful bites. Lila followed her sister's example, her fingers trembling slightly as she held the spoon. John spoke to them in a calm, encouraging voice, asking small questions about where they had traveled, the route they had taken, and what they remembered from their journey. Although their words were broken and accented, he listened carefully, nodding and repeating words they could understand. Once breakfast was finished, John suggested they help with small tasks around the cabin to keep their bodies moving and their minds occupied. "The fire needs more wood," he said, gesturing to the stack by the door. "Would you like to help?" Anna's eyes lit up with curiosity. She had never lived in a cabin before, let alone seen a stove that could burn all night. "Yes," she whispered, still cautious but eager to learn. Lila followed silently, holding Anna's hand, trusting her sister to lead the way. John showed them how to carry small logs without straining themselves and how to place them carefully in the stove to keep the fire steady. They worked slowly at first, laughing softly when a log rolled away or when they accidentally dropped one. Anna enjoyed the activity, fascinated by how the fire grew with each piece of wood. Lila, while more reserved, seemed to take comfort in watching Anna, learning by observation rather than speaking. John noticed how well the sisters supported each other, their bond deep and protective. After tending the fire, John led them outside to check on the ranch animals. The snow had piled high over the fences, and the cattle huddled together for warmth. John explained how to feed the animals, how to lead them to water, and how to keep them safe during harsh weather. Anna eagerly tried each task, her energy returning slowly as the cold had weakened her before. Lila remained careful, handling each task with quiet concentration, making sure not to make mistakes. John smiled at their determination. He admired how the sisters were not only surviving, but also learning quickly in such a foreign environment. By midday, the storm had lessened slightly, allowing the sisters to see more of the landscape. The mountains rose around them, majestic and white, their peaks lost in clouds. John pointed out landmarks, explaining the paths he often rode and where the cattle grazed. Anna asked many questions, full of curiosity about everything she saw. Lila, still quieter, occasionally asked a question or made an observation, and John answered with patience. He realized that while Anna was bold and adventurous, Lila had a keen eye for detail, noticing things others might miss. As the day passed, John encouraged the sisters to tell him more about themselves. Anna shared stories of their childhood, the games she and Lila played, and the lessons their parents had taught them. Lila, at first shy, began to join in, recounting memories of their village and small traditions that had been important to them. John listened intently, asking gentle questions and showing genuine interest. He understood that hearing their stories would help them feel safe, heard, and valued, and it would strengthen the trust between them. In the afternoon, John suggested a small walk near the edge of the ranch where the snow was not too deep. He wanted the sisters to stretch their legs and breathe fresh air without overexerting themselves. Anna, excited and curious, led the way, while Lila followed carefully, occasionally glancing at John to ensure he was nearby. The walk was slow, deliberate, and full of small discoveries. They saw frozen streams, animal tracks in the snow, and trees bent under heavy ice. John pointed out signs of wildlife, explaining which tracks belonged to deer, foxes, and rabbits. Anna was thrilled by the lessons, and Lila's eyes sparkled as she quietly memorized every detail. By the time they returned to the cabin, the sisters were tired but happy. John had prepared a simple lunch, and as they ate, he spoke about the importance of teamwork on the ranch. "We all have to help each other," he said. "Even the smallest hands can make a difference." Anna nodded enthusiastically while Lila smiled softly, understanding the meaning behind his words. The sisters were learning not only to survive but also to be part of something larger, to contribute and feel useful. After lunch, John encouraged them to rest while he worked on some chores outside. Anna and Lila lay near the fire, wrapped in blankets, listening to the wind and the creaking of the cabin. For the first time in days, they felt safe enough to close their eyes. John occasionally peeked in, making sure they were comfortable and warm. He noticed how the sisters' breathing had become steady, their small bodies finally recovering from the harsh night in the snow. In the evening, John prepared a warm stew and invited the sisters to help with simple tasks like stirring and adding ingredients. Anna took the opportunity to learn, asking questions about each step, while Lila carefully measured and watched John's actions. Cooking together created a small bond between them, a sense of family forming around the warm kitchen. They laughed when small mistakes were made and shared quiet smiles when something went right. As night fell, John showed the sisters how to make a small bed with extra blankets near the fire. He encouraged them to share, and they curled up together, just as they had in the snow, but this time in warmth and comfort. He stayed nearby, reading quietly by the fire, keeping watch over them. The sisters felt safe, no longer afraid of the darkness or the storm. During the quiet moments, John realized how much he had come to admire the sisters. Anna's courage and curiosity, combined with Lila's thoughtfulness and keen observation, made them remarkable young women. He understood that survival was only part of their story. They were learning, growing, and slowly becoming part of his life. The harsh winter that had brought them together was also shaping the beginnings of trust, friendship, and a bond that could endure challenges ahead. That night, as the wind howled outside and snowflakes brushed against the windows, John thought about the journey the sisters had endured. He knew their story was far from over. They had survived the storm, but the process of healing, learning, and forming a family-like connection had just begun. Anna and Lila, once lost and alone in the mountains, were now safe, cared for, and beginning to understand that life could offer kindness, warmth, and hope, even in the coldest of places. In the quiet of the cabin, surrounded by blankets, warmth, and the soft crackle of the fire, the bond between John and the sisters deepened. Trust was growing, and with each shared task, story, and meal, the foundation of something lasting was being built. That winter morning, when John had found them freezing and helpless, had become the start of a new chapter. A chapter full of care, courage, learning, and a slowly blossoming sense of family. The following days passed with a rhythm that was new yet comforting for everyone on the ranch. The storm had finally passed, leaving the mountains blanketed in bright, sparkling snow. The sun reflected off the icy hills, casting a dazzling light that made the world seem magical. For John, Anna, and Lila, life on the ranch began to settle into routines, each day bringing new lessons, new tasks, and small joys. John was patient and gentle in teaching the sisters how to handle the daily responsibilities of ranch life. Anna, ever eager and curious, absorbed every lesson quickly. She learned to feed the cattle, noticing how they huddled together for warmth and carefully placing hay for each animal. Lila, although quieter, had a natural way of observing and learning. She noticed the smallest details, the way the animals' hooves sank in the snow, how the water in the troughs could freeze, and how to layer blankets for the youngest calves. Together, the sisters complemented each other perfectly. Anna acted boldly, testing her skills and learning from mistakes, while Lila watched, ready to adjust and correct when needed. John often accompanied them as they worked, offering guidance, encouragement, and praise. "Good job, Anna," he would say. "You remembered to check the water before feeding. That's important." When Lila quietly adjusted a blanket for a shivering calf, he smiled and nodded. "You have a careful eye. That helps the animals stay safe." The sisters grew more confident with each task, their small accomplishments brightening their spirits. When the chores were done, John introduced them to horseback riding. The ranch had a few gentle horses that were used to visitors and beginners. Anna was thrilled at the idea of riding even in the snow and quickly mounted with John's help. Lila hesitated, nervous about balancing on the horse, but Anna held her hand and encouraged her. Slowly, Lila gained confidence, learning to feel the rhythm of the horse beneath her. John guided them gently, teaching how to steer, how to keep balance, and how to understand the horse's moods. The sisters discovered that ranch life was not just hard work, it could also be fun. Anna laughed freely as the horse stumbled on a patch of ice, while Lila giggled softly when she managed a smooth ride. Even John found himself smiling more than usual, watching their joy and enthusiasm. He realized that the cabin, which had once been a quiet, lonely place, was now filled with energy, laughter, and life. As the days grew warmer and the snow began to melt in some areas, John encouraged the sisters to learn about other aspects of ranch life. He taught them how to mend fences, clean barns, and store hay for the animals. Anna loved the hands-on work, enjoying the feeling of accomplishment when a task was completed correctly. Lila, careful and precise, became skilled at organizing and maintaining tools, making sure everything was in order for John. They both took pride in their contributions, feeling useful and important. Evenings were spent inside the cabin where John taught them more than just survival skills. He shared stories of his life on the ranch, of the challenges he had faced and the small victories that had kept him going. Anna and Lila listened eagerly, asking questions and sharing their own stories from the past. Slowly, they began to open up, revealing memories, dreams, and hopes. The bond between them grew stronger, a mixture of trust, respect, and shared experience. Anna began to notice John's kindness in small ways, the way he made sure they always had warm clothing, how he remembered details from their stories, and how he always listened without judgment. Lila observed his patience, the gentle way he corrected mistakes, and the quiet strength that made her feel safe. The sisters began to feel that the ranch was more than just a safe place. It was a home, and John was more than just a caretaker. He had become someone they could rely on, someone who cared deeply for their well-being. One afternoon, John decided to teach them how to cook more elaborate meals. They worked together in the cabin's small kitchen, preparing bread, stew, and simple desserts. Anna was quick to try new tasks, kneading dough and stirring the pot with confidence.
Lila, more careful, measured ingredients meticulously and tasted each step, learning the subtle balance of flavors. Cooking became more than just nourishment, it became an opportunity to bond, laugh, and learn from one another.
By the end of the meal, the cabin smelled of fresh bread and herbs, and the sisters beamed with pride at what they had created. As the sisters grew stronger, they also began to take on more responsibility for themselves. Anna would go outside to collect firewood or check on the animals, while Lila helped organize the cabin and clean up after meals. John encouraged them to work together, reminding them that teamwork made life on the ranch smoother and safer. The sisters quickly learned the value of cooperation, and their confidence grew with each passing day. The social aspect of ranch life was new to them as well. Occasionally, neighbors or travelers passed by, and John introduced the sisters, explaining how they had survived the snowstorm. Anna and Lila, initially shy, began to speak in short sentences, gradually learning to communicate with others. They were proud of their survival story, yet humble about the help they had received. John noticed how their spirits were lifting, their laughter more frequent, and their eyes brighter. One evening after a long day of work, John, Anna, and Lila sat together outside, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of pink and orange. Anna leaned against John's shoulder, tired but happy, while Lila sat close to her sister, feeling secure and calm. John reflected on the changes he had seen in them. They had arrived weak, frightened, and cold, but now they were learning, growing, and becoming strong. He felt a deep satisfaction knowing that his guidance had helped them regain confidence and hope. Over time, the sisters also began to contribute ideas and suggestions for ranch life. Anna suggested building a small shelter for animals near the barn to protect them from snow and cold, while Lila thought of ways to store food more efficiently. John welcomed their input, realizing that their fresh perspective could improve life on the ranch. Their contributions showed initiative, creativity, and a sense of responsibility that impressed him. As days turned into weeks, John noticed a subtle change in the way the sisters interacted with him. They no longer looked at him only as a protector. They began to admire his strength, his wisdom, and his gentle nature. Anna often sought his approval before trying new tasks, while Lila occasionally asked for guidance in a way that showed respect and trust. John, in turn, appreciated their growing independence, realizing that his role was not only to protect but also to teach and guide them toward self-confidence. Even simple moments became meaningful. Sharing meals, laughing at small mistakes, and sitting together by the fire created a sense of family. The sisters began to refer to John with warmth, no longer just as a stranger who saved them, but as someone central to their lives. John felt a quiet happiness he had not known in years, surrounded by energy, laughter, and the trust of two remarkable young women. One snowy morning, Anna and Lila helped John feed the cattle, moving through the snow without hesitation. Their movements were confident, precise, and careful. John watched them with pride, amazed at how far they had come in such a short time. The harsh winter had brought them together, and the days that followed had strengthened them, creating bonds of trust, respect, and mutual support. By the end of the week, the sisters had settled into life on the ranch. Tasks that had seemed impossible during their first days were now part of a routine. They had learned to ride, feed the animals, cook, and even mend clothes. Most importantly, they had learned to trust John completely, feeling safe and cared for in a way they had never experienced before. The ranch, once quiet and lonely, now echoed with laughter, chatter, and the soft sounds of companionship. In the evenings, as the sun set behind the mountains, John often sat by the fire with Anna and Lila, reflecting on the journey they had shared. The sisters had survived near death in the snowstorm, but they had also discovered a place where they could grow, learn, and feel safe. John realized that life on the ranch was no longer just about survival. It was about creating a home, a family, and a sense of belonging. The sisters, once strangers in a dangerous winter, were now part of John's life in a meaningful way. They brought energy, curiosity, and warmth to the ranch, while John offered protection, guidance, and care. Together, they formed a new kind of family, built on trust, respect, and the shared experience of overcoming hardship. The days on the ranch were long and often demanding, but they were also filled with joy, learning, and the quiet satisfaction of building something lasting. Life on the ranch had changed forever. Anna and Lila were no longer simply survivors of a snowstorm. They were young women finding their place in the world, learning new skills and building bonds that would endure. John had become more than a rancher. They had become a family, connected by kindness, courage, and the small, everyday acts that made life meaningful. As the snow began to melt and the first signs of spring appeared, the ranch felt alive in a new way. The work continued, the animals thrived, and the sisters grew stronger every day. The bond between John, Anna, and Lila had deepened, forming a foundation that could weather any storm, both literal and figurative. They were no longer just a man and two sisters. They were a team, a family, and a story of survival, growth, and hope. As spring slowly approached, the snow on the ranch began to melt, revealing patches of green grass beneath. The mountains still held some snow, but the days were warmer, and the sun shone longer. Life on the ranch had settled into a comfortable rhythm. John, Anna, and Lila had grown accustomed to their routines, working together seamlessly and enjoying each other's company. Yet, beneath the surface of their daily life, emotions were stirring, emotions that none of them fully understood, and which would soon test the bonds they had built so carefully. John had always been a man of routine and quiet emotions. He had lived alone for many years, used to the solitude, and had not thought much about companionship beyond the occasional neighborly visit. But as he watched Anna and Lila work together on the ranch, he felt a deep admiration for their courage, intelligence, and resilience. He noticed how Anna's eyes lit up when she mastered a new task, how Lila's careful hands moved with precision, and how both sisters seemed to bring a sense of joy and life that he had not felt in years. It was during a warm afternoon, while they were repairing a fence near the edge of the property, that John first realized his feelings might be more than simple care or friendship. Anna was climbing over the fence to fix a loose post, her hands nimble and her expression determined. Lila was handing her tools, watching carefully, her eyes alert and cautious. John could not help but feel a swell of pride and admiration for both of them. He cared for them deeply, more than he had expected. The sisters, meanwhile, were also experiencing new emotions. They had spent weeks living with John, learning from him, sharing meals, and laughing together. Anna, bold and curious, found herself thinking about him often, wondering what he was thinking, and feeling a warmth in his presence she could not explain. Lila, quieter and more observant, felt a different pull, a sense of comfort, trust, and admiration that slowly grew into something more. Both sisters had come to rely on John not only for safety, but for guidance, support, and companionship. As the days went by, the emotional tension grew, though none of them spoke about it directly. John noticed the subtle ways the sisters sought his attention, Anna asking him questions while working, Lila lingering nearby when he gave instructions, or both of them sharing small smiles when he praised their efforts. He found himself thinking about them when he was alone, worrying about how to balance his feelings with the responsibilities of running the ranch and caring for them. One evening, as the three sat by the fire after a long day of work, the topic of conversation shifted. Anna spoke excitedly about a plan to plant a small garden near the cabin, suggesting vegetables and herbs that could sustain them through the year.
Lila added quiet but thoughtful ideas about irrigation and soil preparation.
John listened carefully, nodding and offering guidance, but also noticing the way their eyes met his from time to time, glances that carried admiration, trust, and something more subtle, something unspoken. For the first time, John felt a sense of conflict. He cared deeply for both sisters, yet he knew he could not choose lightly. He respected them and their independence, but he also realized that they had come to see him as more than a protector. The thought of causing pain or disappointment weighed heavily on him. That night, he stayed awake long after the fire had died down, thinking about what it would mean to navigate these emotions and how to honor the bond he shared with both Anna and Lila without causing harm. The sisters, too, were feeling the tension. Anna had begun to notice the small ways John looked at her,
His quiet smiles when she succeeded at a task, the way he gently corrected her mistakes, and the concern in his eyes when she struggled. She could not deny that her feelings were growing, though she struggled to understand them. Lila felt a similar pull, though hers was quieter and more internal. She admired John's strength, kindness, and wisdom, and found herself longing for his approval and attention. Both sisters cared deeply for each other and did not want to come between themselves, but they could not ignore the emotions stirring within. The tension became more apparent one afternoon when John asked the sisters to help him check on the cattle in a distant part of the ranch. Anna and Lila rode together side by side, while John followed behind. During the ride, Anna made a small joke that made John laugh, and the sound of his laughter made her heart race. Lila, noticing the reaction, felt a pang of jealousy, even as she tried to hide it. The sisters exchanged a glance but did not speak about their feelings. The unspoken emotions hung in the air, subtle but powerful, creating a delicate balance in their interactions. As the weeks went by, the emotional complexity of their relationships grew. The sisters began to express their affection in small ways, sharing tasks with extra care, preparing meals with attention to detail, and occasionally lingering near John when he worked. John, in turn, found himself increasingly aware of their presence, their laughter, and their small gestures of care. He realized that life on the ranch was no longer simple. It was filled with feelings, desires, and choices that required thought and sensitivity. One evening, a neighbor stopped by, curious about the unusual household. John introduced Anna and Lila, explaining how he had found them during the snowstorm and cared for them. The neighbor complimented their courage and praised John for his kindness. As the neighbor left, Anna and Lila exchanged a quiet smile. They knew that their presence in John's life was unusual and perhaps even extraordinary, but they also felt a sense of pride and belonging. The connection between them had grown stronger, and the emotional tension that simmered beneath the surface became more apparent. John began to notice the way the sisters supported each other even as they navigated their growing feelings. Anna would gently remind Lila to speak up when she had an idea, while Lila offered quiet encouragement when Anna took bold steps. John admired this balance and realized that their bond was not only about survival but about mutual respect and care. At the same time, he knew he had to be cautious. Any wrong move, any misstep could upset the delicate harmony they had built. One afternoon, after a long day of work, John found himself sitting alone on the porch, watching the sisters laugh as they carried water from the stream. The sight warmed his heart, but it also reminded him of the emotional complexity he faced. He cared deeply for both of them, but he knew that expressing his feelings could change everything. He could sense that they both felt the same way, yet he could not ignore the responsibility he had to ensure that the household remained peaceful, supportive, and respectful. The sisters, too, were aware of their own emotions. They had grown attached to John not only for his protection, but for his guidance, wisdom, and kindness. Anna often found herself stealing glances at him when he worked, while Lila quietly observed his expressions, trying to understand his thoughts. Both sisters struggled with the idea of wanting more while also valuing the bond they shared with each other. They were navigating uncharted territory, learning about emotions they had never experienced before, and trying to balance affection with respect and care. John understood that the coming days would require honesty, patience, and sensitivity. He could not ignore the feelings that were growing between him and the sisters, nor could he allow them to disrupt the harmony of their lives on the ranch. He began to consider how to approach the situation carefully, respecting their autonomy and emotions, while also acknowledging the connection that had developed. It was a delicate path, one that required wisdom and care. As the sun set behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the ranch, John, Anna, and Lila sat together near the fire. The warmth of the flames mirrored the growing closeness between them, but it also highlighted the unspoken emotions that hovered in the air. They spoke of small things, plans for the garden, the health of the animals, and memories from their journey. But beneath the surface, a deeper tension remained. Each of them felt it, acknowledged it silently, and hoped that the bond they had built could withstand the complexity of growing feelings. By nightfall, as the stars began to shine over the mountains, John reflected on the journey they had shared. The sisters had grown from frightened, shivering survivors to confident, capable young women, full of energy, curiosity, and life.
Yet with this growth came emotional challenges that none of them had anticipated. John understood that navigating these feelings would require patience, honesty, and compassion.
He also realized that the bond they shared was rare, a bond formed through hardship, trust, and mutual care, and one that could endure if nurtured carefully. The night was quiet, except for the crackling of the fire and the occasional rustle of the wind outside.
Anna and Lila lay together near the warmth, sharing blankets, their thoughts filled with hope, uncertainty, and the emotions they were only beginning to understand. John sat nearby, reflecting on the delicate balance of love, care, and responsibility. Life on the ranch had become more complex, richer, and more meaningful than he had ever imagined. The emotional journey was only beginning, and the choices they made in the coming days would shape the future of their unusual but deeply connected household.
Spring was fully arriving at the ranch. The snow had mostly melted, leaving soft green grass, colorful wildflowers, and clear streams flowing through the valleys. The animals roamed freely, the sun shone warmly, and life felt brighter than it had in months. For John, Anna, and Lila, these changes were more than seasonal. They reflected the changes within themselves and the bond they had built together.
John had spent many days thinking carefully about the growing feelings between him and the sisters. He cared deeply for both Anna and Lila, and he wanted to honor the trust, loyalty, and affection they had shared.
He knew he had to act with patience and respect. He could not rush anything, yet he also realized that ignoring their feelings would create distance and confusion.
One evening, after tending to the animals and preparing a simple supper, John gathered Anna and Lila by the fire. "I want to speak with you both," he began gently. "We have been through a lot together, and I care about both of you very much. I also know that life here has grown more complicated than we expected. I need to be honest about my feelings, and I want us to find a way forward that respects each other." Anna and Lila listened quietly, their expressions a mix of curiosity, nervousness, and anticipation.
John continued, explaining that he valued them not only as sisters, but as people he admired deeply. He told them that he wanted them to remain together, to continue learning, growing, and sharing life on the ranch, and that he hoped their relationship could be one of mutual care and partnership. Anna, always bold, was the first to speak.
"John,"
she said, her voice steady but emotional.
"we both care about you. We have never felt safer or happier. We trust you, and we want to be part of your life. We don't want to be apart, and we want to help you in every way we can."
Lila, more quiet but equally sincere, nodded.
I feel the same.
I admire you and want to stay with you, to help you, to learn, and to be part of this home. I know Anna feels the same. We want to be together, but we also want to be with you.
John felt a deep warmth and relief. He realized that their feelings, though unconventional, were sincere and thoughtful.
They cared for him, yes, but they also cared for each other, which was the most important thing. They were not asking to replace one another. They were asking to share life, work together, and build something meaningful as a family. Over the following days, the three of them began to define this new life together. They established routines that allowed everyone to contribute to the ranch while also spending time together in learning, leisure, and simple enjoyment. Anna took charge of outdoor tasks with bold energy, while Lila managed indoor responsibilities, ensuring the cabin was organized, meals were prepared, and small details were attended to. John coordinated the larger work, guiding and teaching them, while also cherishing the moments they spent together. The ranch itself flourished under their combined efforts. The garden that Anna had suggested thrived in the sunlight, with vegetables and herbs growing robustly. Lila organized the storage of food and supplies, ensuring that nothing was wasted and that the household ran smoothly. Together they repaired fences, tended to the animals, and maintained the cabin with care and diligence. Each task strengthened not only their skills, but also their bond. Evenings became a time of connection and reflection. They shared stories, laughter, and quiet conversations by the fire. John taught them about the stars, the history of the land, and the traditions of ranching.
Anna and Lila shared tales of their childhood, their village, and lessons from their parents. Through these exchanges, they learned not only about survival, but about culture, compassion, and family. The cabin, once quiet and lonely, was now alive with warmth, light, and the joy of shared life. One day, as the sun rose over the mountains, John, Anna, and Lila worked together to build a small shelter near the barn for the youngest animals. The sisters carried wood, helped with hammering and measuring, and laughed together when mistakes were made. John guided them patiently, correcting gently, praising frequently, and ensuring that each task was a learning opportunity. By the end of the day, the shelter stood strong, and the three of them stood back to admire their work. Anna clapped her hands, Lila smiled quietly, and John felt proud, not just of the shelter, but of the teamwork and care that had made it possible. As spring deepened, the sisters began to take on new challenges. Anna learned how to ride further distances, helping John check on distant herds, while Lila learned to tend to minor injuries in the animals, using knowledge John had taught her. Each accomplishment was celebrated with shared meals and laughter, creating a sense of pride and belonging. They were no longer simply surviving. They were thriving, together, as a family. The emotional bond between them also grew stronger. Anna's boldness and energy balanced Lila's careful observation and thoughtfulness, while John's guidance provided stability and wisdom. The three supported one another, each contributing unique strengths to their shared life. Moments of quiet companionship, watching the sunset, sharing stories by the fire, or sitting together after a long day of work, became cherished rituals, reinforcing the sense of family and love that was forming naturally. Neighbors began to notice the unusual household and often stopped by to offer greetings or assistance. John introduced Anna and Lila with pride, explaining how they had survived the snowstorm and grown into capable, confident young women. The sisters, once shy and cautious, now spoke openly, demonstrating not only their survival skills but also their strength, confidence, and intelligence. The community saw not just a man and two sisters, but a family built on trust, respect, and shared effort. As summer approached, the three of them worked together to prepare the ranch for the warmer months.
They planted additional crops, mended fences, and cleaned barns, each task undertaken with cooperation and joy. Anna's energy and adventurous spirit brought excitement to the work, while Lila's careful planning ensured that nothing was overlooked. John guided, taught, and celebrated their efforts, creating an environment where each person's contribution was valued. Even in moments of quiet, the sisters expressed affection and care toward John. Anna often leaned against his shoulder while he explained tasks, her confidence mixed with admiration. Lila occasionally reached out to help him with small chores, her quiet support a reminder of the trust and bond they shared. John, in turn, expressed his care through teaching, protection, and the consistent attention he gave to both of them. The household became a place where love and respect coexisted naturally. The sisters also supported one another in this new dynamic. Anna would encourage Lila to speak up, offering gentle reassurance, while Lila reminded Anna to think carefully before acting, providing wisdom and balance. Their mutual respect and loyalty ensured that no rivalry developed between them. Instead, they grew closer, understanding that their connection with John did not diminish their connection with each other. The household became a living example of cooperation, care, and love in different forms. As autumn approached, the ranch had fully transformed from a lonely cabin in the mountains to a thriving home filled with life, laughter, and warmth. John, Anna, and Lila had built a routine that balanced work, learning, and leisure. They celebrated small achievements, shared stories, and supported one another through challenges. Life on the ranch was not always easy, but it was fulfilling, meaningful, and deeply connected. On one quiet evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains and the sky glowed in shades of gold and pink, John, Anna, and Lila sat together outside the cabin. They watched the animals grazing in the soft light, the wind rustling gently through the trees. Anna rested her head on John's shoulder. Lila sat close to her sister, and John felt a deep sense of peace. They had survived the snowstorm, navigated challenges, and built a home together. The love, trust, and respect that had grown between them had transformed their lives completely. John realized that life on the ranch was no longer simply about survival or work. It was about connection, growth, and the creation of a family that chose to care for one another every day. Anna and Lila had found safety, guidance, and companionship, while John had found joy, purpose, and love. The challenges of the past had become the foundation for a life filled with meaning and happiness. The sisters laughed quietly as they shared stories of the animals, the garden, and their small adventures on the ranch. John joined in, their laughter mingling with the sounds of the evening. In that moment, the world outside, the mountains, the fields, and the changing seasons felt perfect. The bond they shared had been tested and strengthened, and now it was unbreakable. Life on the ranch continued, full of work, learning, and joy. The sisters contributed their energy, intelligence, and care, while John offered guidance, protection, and love. Together they formed a unique family built on trust, respect, and shared experience. The cabin that had once been quiet and lonely was now a home, warm with laughter, filled with stories, and rich with the love that had grown naturally between them. The journey that began with a snowstorm, fear, and uncertainty had led to something extraordinary. Anna and Lila were no longer simply survivors. They were young women with purpose, confidence, and a home. John was no longer simply a rancher. He was a protector, teacher, and beloved figure in the lives of two remarkable sisters. Together, they had built a life that was stronger, happier, and more meaningful than any of them could have imagined. As night fell over the mountains, the fire crackled softly in the cabin, and the stars sparkled above. John, Anna, and Lila sat close together, reflecting on the journey they had shared. They had faced challenges, weathered storms, and grown in ways they never expected, yet through it all they had found love, trust, and the profound bond of family. The winter that had brought them together seemed far away now, replaced by the warmth of a home built on care, courage, and shared life. In the end, the ranch was more than a place to live. It was a symbol of their journey, resilience, and connection. John, Anna, and Lila had discovered that family is not always defined by tradition or circumstance, but by love, respect, and the willingness to care for one another. Together, they faced the future with hope, joy, and the knowledge that no storm, literal or metaphorical, could ever break the bond they had created.